to move to our next session, and our next session will be a great one, I can assure you, because it's my privilege to welcome an amateur radio operator whose journey began during her school days. Her journey began as a secondary student in her homeland of Trinidad and Tobago, where she first discovered her love for amateur radio. Upon moving to the United States, she got her FCC extra class license and has since become a prominent voice in the ham radio community. So, welcome. So I would like to request all our dignitaries to welcome with me none other than Jairam, November to Romeo Juliet, N2RJ. Please join us.
We have no microphone problems. Okay, cool. See, I got it fixed in time. That's for me. All right. So, one of the things I do professionally, apart from making YouTube videos, which is not professional, but I do cybersecurity. I'm a lead architect at a company which I'm not representing today, but that is my daily work. So I do cybersecurity, and I'm going to tell you about amateur radio, including an analysis of a recent incident that some of you might have heard about. Okay, so how many of you know about the incident with the ARRL? Okay, quite a few people. Okay, good. So I have to talk less then. All right. So I have to put this disclaimer up. I'm speaking for myself. I'm not representing any organization with this talk, but this is my honest opinion of myself. So, okay. A little bit about my qualifications. My undergrad was electrical engineering, and then now I do cybersecurity. I've been in the cyber field for a long time. I hold a CISSP, CSSLP, CCSP. I do AWS and all other security stuff. So, okay, right. So why this topic? Why now? Why? That seems to be the questions on everybody's mind now. Why are we doing this? Well, it is a complicated world right now, right? It is a world, I think, that cyber is a new frontier in, it used to be, when I started cybersecurity in the 1990s, so now everybody knows how old I am, but in the 1990s, we had, it wasn't really serious threats, right? Like people might deface a web page, people might write a virus to make things a little difficult. But now it's gotten to a whole new level. You have, especially the threat of ransomware. And you have now where critical infrastructure is being targeted. And with all of the good presentations we've had today regarding emergency communications, disaster resilience, and all of that, amateur radio is pretty much critical infrastructure now. So we are being targeted. And you should know that. You should also know how to defend yourself, and I'll tell you how to defend yourself. So, the first thing is, we are regarded as critical infrastructure, right? Threat actors are interested in not only our data, but they're interested in our hardware and radio. And tomorrow, I'm going to give a nice talk on IoT security, which is a nice talk I actually gave at my alma mater, New York University School of Engineering. It's a nice talk. Ransomware, like I said, is a big threat these days. But also, you have to be aware of privacy risks, which have been around for a long time, particularly with the fact that we have no encryption for data in transit and amateur radio. So we talk about digital communications, especially for emergency services. We need to be a little mindful of what we are transmitting over the air so that we don't run afoul of various regulations and stuff like that too. And of course, we have more computers, we have IoT devices in amateur radio today, and that could be a blessing and a curse. Okay, so like I said, we lived in a simpler time, right? Anybody know who this guy is? Who is that? Okay, that's Jairam Percy Maxim. He was the founder of ARRL. And you can see his radio set is quite a simple contraption there. It's basically, has some tubes and behind that tubes and knobs and switches and things that ham radio operators love. But That's not how we do ham radio today, right? Radio was all analog back then, and the operator had full control over everything. But you know, the first story of radio is actually is a story of disruption. When the Titanic sank, you know, in modern terms, we would probably call that a distributed denial of service attack. What happened with the Titanic was that they were sending distress calls, but so many radio operators were on, and they were sending messages all over. And remember, we didn't have formalized amateur radio bands back then, so everybody transmitted where they wanted. And these had QRM, the distress calls, so the ship sank and nobody heard about it. As a result, we got radio licensing out of that, so now everybody had to operate a license, and we went 200 meters and down. That's just an aside, right? By the way, back then there was no internet, in case anybody was wondering. Okay, today it's completely different. We have digital radios, we have digital modes, we have software-defined radios, where you have a minimal bit of hardware, and you have most of the radio in software. And we have the internet. And the internet, we love the internet, but the internet enables all sorts of people to get into things. Alright, but let's go back to what the ARRL had. And I'll read some of this because this is quite small, and my eyesight is not as good as some of these people. So they say sometime in early May 2024, which is ironically around the time of Dayton Convention, the systems network was compromised by threat actors using information they purchased on a dark web. So they then go on to say how they access the on-site systems and the cloud-based systems. I know they have applications in AWS, Amazon Web Services, and they use a wide variety of payloads. Translation of this is that the whole of the ARRL network was infected by ransomware. And this ransomware got into everything and basically allowed attackers to encrypt a lot of their systems accessing data. So the serious incident was an act of organized crime, right? And a highly coordinated executed attack took place during the early morning of the hours of May 15th. And it's apparent that ARRL had become the victim of an extensive, sophisticated ransomware attack. Okay, so by then the FBI gets involved. And when the feds are involved, you know, stuff is serious now. The ARRL also had cyber insurance, and they invoked that, and they got a consultant to not only do the cyber cleanup, but also negotiate with the ransom demand. Okay, initially I think they started out at $6 million, and then eventually, well, you know, the ARRL says, we don't have that kind of money at our disposal, and then they say, okay, we'll just take up $1 million. And most of that was covered by insurance. So you have a concept known as risk transference, right? Where they have the insurance essentially cover the cost of the ransom. They had, you know, meetings with the executives and the board, and they restored a lot of stuff. But you know, there are still lessons to learn from this, because a lot of this, some of it was pretty preventable, in my opinion. So let's dive into what, you know, what caused some of this thing and what could have been done to prevent it. So there's a common adage in ham radio in particular that, you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? They had a lot of old servers around. They were using, I think somebody said they were using CentOS 6 or something like that, you know, and which is like 2008 old. They had not updated the patches in a while. They had a lot of things open to the internet. And then, of course, they were very high profile, and the attackers were sophisticated. Now, the thing about attacker sophistication is that a lot of actors now are not just people who sit around in their basement thinking, well, you know, I'm just going to attack something for the lulz. They're sponsored by states, right? You have a lot of states that, you know, want to sponsor this kind of chaos because it fuels their national budget. In the interest of not being targeted, I would not say who they are, but you could pretty much guess who some of them are. Okay. But anyway, so I'm sure you've heard of the concept of technical debt, where things are basically built shoddily in the beginning, and then, in the future, things would be remediated. The AWL had a lot of technical debt, and they also had a lot of systems that were just old and not really, up to date on patches and stuff. So, from what I was told, the DXCC system, and this was posted by one of the developers, was using FoxPro. Anybody know what FoxPro is? Yeah, exactly, right? FoxPro is one of those old pieces of software that your grandfather used to use to write databases. And they were using that for one of the systems, I think it was DXCC. And the point of that is that, it was there, it was working until the attackers got it. They had some systems exposed to the internet, and then they also had systems exposed internally to internet-facing systems. The last one in cyber parlance is what we refer to, it enables something called lateral movement. So, remember I described earlier on where the attackers were able to get in and then get into other systems? That's called lateral movement. Alright, so the old software that was unpatched, they had a bunch of vulnerabilities that were there, and it basically made the attacker's job very easy to go in, lock everything down, and steal the data. The other problem with old software is that the systems could not be patched, right? Because Microsoft stopped supporting FoxPro for a while, and they had to basically air gap them. So air gapping means that how they had to basically isolate them from the internet with no chance of them coming into contact with anything internet facing. Other workarounds had to be implemented, and we're still in the process of recovering some of that. But thankfully, cyber insurance covered a lot of it. So, I spoke about risk transfer before. So like I said, the ransom was $1 million final amount. It was negotiated down. It was paid by insurance. And the important thing is, a lot of this is now paid by cryptocurrency. So a lot of attackers now want their ransom in cryptocurrency because essentially it's anonymous and untraceable. Because crypto relies on something called a blockchain, which is a distributed system that you can easily hide your tracks, right? And they obviously don't want to be caught. Okay, so that was the ARRL, and let's talk about general risks here in ham radio. So, by design, ham radio does not encrypt anything in most countries. In most countries, their regulations do not permit amateur radio to encrypt any part of the system. There are a few exceptions. The one exception, of course, is satellites, right? And satellites, they have to encrypt the control signals because you don't want rogue actors getting control of satellites and misdirecting them and crashing into other things. So regulations, at least in the US, allow that, and other countries too. I believe in most countries of the EU, and possibly Japan and a few others. I don't know too much about the regulations of India, I apologize, but if you do, let me know, okay? So, any passwords and credentials and data passed over radio are assumed to be in the public domain. So this means if you log into a Linux server over ham radio, the password is sent in clear text. There is a way around this. The thing is that a lot of ham radio frequencies are shared with unlicensed services, and they don't have the same restrictions as ham radio. So for example, if you're using like 2.4 gigahertz, for example, right? You don't necessarily have to use that under amateur radio. You can use that under an unlicensed service. In the United States, we use what you call Part 15. So you find that a lot of experimenters and people who play with internet technologies, they forego the use of ham radio because they want to preserve the ability to use encryption. And encryption would be things like using SSH, secure shell, and HTTPS, right? The little padlock you see on the web browser, which enables something called TLS, transport layer security, which basically encrypts your connection from end to end. So that is one way to get around it. The other thing is, whoops, hello? Okay. Yeah. The other thing is, one thing I learned, we had an incident in the US called September 11 attacks in 2001, and I was a key part of that recovery. One of the things the Red Cross told me, I was deployed with the Red Cross, they told us do not pass any medical information over radio because you don't want people hearing it. And we have laws that protect privacy of people's medical data. So this means that how, passing protected health information over radio is something that we generally don't do. There are other things you can pass. You can pass like health and welfare, you can pass that kind of stuff, but you can't say, for example, that this patient has diabetes, they need insulin. So, okay. The other thing is a lot of our radios are now connected to the internet. So think of what a remote radio can do, right? Let's say somebody wanted to get into your radio, take control of it, and start broadcasting propaganda messages. Well, they don't have. They just have to get on Fox News now. But anyway, but a lot of radios now have this capability, and I find that a lot of radio vendors who have this remote capability don't secure it very well. Flex Radio actually has a good mechanism. They use an encrypted connection to secure their radio remote infrastructure. But a lot of them say basically, well, just open a port on the firewall and then, connect and everything's hunky-dory. It's not. The other thing is if you actually leave this open and somebody gets in, you can be legally liable. In many countries, your station, if you allow access to your station, either accidentally, the regulations of your country might leave you legally liable for unlicensed operation. Another risk as well is that remote radios are also network devices. If somebody gets into a radio that's controlled by like Linux operating system, they can then use that as a springboard for lateral movement to monitor traffic on your home network or get into other things, or even use it to launch attacks on other devices too. And then finally, some of these are powered by general purpose computers that run like Windows operating system. That's a whole other thing. All right, so the countermeasures, how do you secure against that? Okay, so one of the things I always advocate for is remote using a VPN. And I publish a script on my GitHub to install SoftEther VPN. And that is one popular package you're able to use to secure access to your network. Keep your software up to date, right? Your radio and your host computer, so install the manufacturer's updates. You might want to wait, you could wait a little bit just to make sure that it does not damage anything or it's stable. But generally you want to keep stuff up to date. You don't want to be running old versions of software. Make sure your router as well, your home router is not vulnerable. Keep it patched and updated. Have a means of shutting off your station in case it's compromised. In the UK radio regulations, so when I first got licensed, I actually had to take the exam in the UK. And in the UK, they require a master switch for your amateur station. This is one method you can use. The caveat of this, of course, is this is also internet connected. But if you have a VPN, you can basically secure this as well too. This is a digital logger switch at webpowerswitch.com. You can then connect this remotely and have this, switch off your station. Okay, the Raspberry Pi. So the Raspberry Pi, how many of you have a Raspberry Pi? Okay, yeah, the whole room, yeah. Okay, great. So the Raspberry Pi is a general purpose Linux computer. It has IoT capabilities because you see a lot of this, these pins here, the GPIO here, has capability to externally interface to the world, and you have people making hats and all sorts of cool things. They're very popular for running like DMR. I know some of you operate DMR because I probably talked to someone on the radio on DMR. It's an additional security risk. There are measures you can use to protect against that, right? You would not believe how many people don't change their default password on their Raspberry Pi, to the point where Raspberry Pi OS now requires you to change a password on first login. Keep the system updated. there are ways to actually do that. There's an automatic update facility. Disable auto login, right? Like some people prefer to, like, you know, they just turn on a Raspberry Pi and then they get into this nice GUI interface that they could just do anything they want. Disable that. Disable the Pi user. So by default, the Raspberry Pi comes with a user called Pi. And that's very easy to guess because you know what it is? The user Pi usually has a password, Raspberry. Which brings me to the other thing. Disable unnecessary services. So if you don't need something on your Raspberry Pi, disable it. A lot of functions that you use on it require administrator access. So in Linux, we use a facility called sudo, right? Super user do. And by default, this does not require a password. But there is a way you can actually make this to require a password, where we enter any command that requires administrator access, it prompts you for the password. Disable root login, so you don't want to have a remote administrative access. You can also use SSH keys, so instead of having to type a password, you have a key file on your computer, right? And what I will do is, I have an extensive web link with all these security measures explained in so simple details that even I will understand it, that you can use to secure it. So I'll send it out, you know, we can send it out to those who attended here. And then there are a couple other measures here too. Okay? Alright, last few things. Consider Raspberry Pi OS Lite. So there's a light version of Raspberry Pi which doesn't have all the unnecessary fluff that could be subject to vulnerabilities. Most times you don't need a graphical user interface because you're using a Raspberry Pi as an appliance. And then you can disable root from SSH and use sudo instead and require a password for it. Okay. Alright, and that's the end of my talk. And thank you very much for attendance. Stay safe and secure.